On a warm June summer day in 1942, fighters, bombers, and aircraft carriers would battle to decide the fate of the Pacific. This is history's war room. As a combat veteran, I've always found the Battle of Midway to be one of the finest examples of American strategic ingenuity during World War II. In the spring of 1942, beginning to feel vulnerable in their fight against the Americans, the Japanese hurried to expand their reach in the Pacific. They set their sights on Midway Atoll, a pair of islands almost directly in between the mainland United States and Japan. By 1942, Midway was home to a brand new American naval and air force base, and it would soon face its greatest challenge. This is the Battle of Midway. The Japanese Navy is led by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Worried about the scope and speed of America's wartime industry, Yamamoto believes the U.S. naval forces need to be defeated quickly before the U.S. can ramp up into full military production. Mirroring the success of Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto's entire strategy hinges on a surprise attack. On the day before the Midway invasion, Yamamoto will send a small force to the Aleutian Islands off the coast of Alaska. He expects the Americans will divert their fleet to defend the islands, drawing their forces away from Midway. Yamamoto plans his invasion of Midway itself in 3 phases. Phase 1. The Japanese 1st Carrier Striking Force will attack Midway Island by air. This group is led by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. His fleet is built around 4 first-line aircraft carriers: the Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu. Phase 2. After the destruction of Midway's defenses, Yamamoto will bring in the Midway Invasion Force, commanded by Vice Admiral Nobutake Kondo. His ships will land 5,000 soldiers on the islands, crushing any remaining American forces. Phase 3. Yamamoto expects American reinforcements to arrive from Pearl Harbor, already diminished by the Japanese offensive in Alaska. Nagumo's force will strike again, attacking the Americans in concert with Yamamoto's own fleet of battleships, carriers, and destroyers, waiting 600 miles to the west. Yamamoto expects his secret plan to shock and overwhelm the American military, giving the Japanese a decisive victory and a strong foothold in the Pacific. But that's not what happens. Working in a windowless basement at Pearl Harbor, Commander Joseph Rochefort leads the U.S. Navy's Combat Intelligence Unit. By March of 1942, Rochefort and his team have deciphered much of the Japanese naval code. And, in a discovery that would save countless American lives, they learn the time, size, and strategy of the impending Midway invasion. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, immediately starts drawing up a plan. He will fight the battle mainly in the air, keeping his carriers well out of striking distance of the Japanese Navy. Nimitz's 3 carriers are split into 2 groups. Task Force 17 is led by Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, who is also given command of tactical decisions during the battle. The USS Yorktown serves as his flagship. The 2nd carrier group, Task Force 16, is led by Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance. Spruance's group includes the aircraft carriers Enterprise and Hornet. The U.S. forces are ready. Yamamoto believes he has the Americans cornered, when in fact, Nimitz is the one laying the trap. On June 3rd, Yamamoto strikes the Aleutian Islands as planned, but Admiral Nimitz, anticipating his moves, has stationed a small contingent to defend the Aleutians, saving the majority of his forces for the impending Midway invasion. As Yamamoto's forces approach Midway, he receives intelligence suggesting there may be American carriers in the area. Yamamoto wants to inform Admiral Nagumo, whose fleet is farther along towards Midway. However, the Japanese were suspicious of the Americans listening in on their radio communications, and thus Yamamoto chooses to maintain radio silence. Meanwhile, at Midway, U.S. forces prepare for the Japanese attack. Ensign Jack Reed, flying his PBY Catalina scout plane through heavy fog, just barely spots the first Japanese ships at 0925. Reed thinks he has spotted the main fleet, but in reality, it is Vice Admiral Kondo's invasion force, the group meant to attack Midway in Phase 2 of Yamamoto's plan. 9 B-17 bombers are dispatched to attack Kondo's ships. but can't land any hits. Although tactically inconsequential, this attack marks the first military engagement of the battle. Kondo, adhering to the Japanese policy of radio silence, doesn't inform Nagumo of the bomber attack. Nagumo has no inkling of an American ambush. On the morning of June 4th, 15 American B-17 bombers take off from Midway to search for and attack any Japanese naval targets. Shortly thereafter, Admiral Nagumo launches his Midway attack as planned. 108 aircraft, including A-6M-0 fighters, D-3A Val dive bombers, and B-5N Kate torpedo bombers. The Americans launch 4 separate groups of aircraft to attack the Japanese fleet. 6 Navy Grumman TBFs, 4 Army B-26 Marauders, 16 Marine SBD-2 Dauntlesses, and 11 Marine SB-2U Vindicators. At 05:56, the air raid siren blares at Midway as the incoming Japanese planes are spotted. Squads of F-2A Buffalo and F-4F Wildcat fighters engage the Japanese attackers at 06:16. Japanese pilots swiftly bomb Midway's hangars, runways, hospital, and power plant. The American fighters are outnumbered, but still manage to defend their base. After 27 minutes of hell raining down on Midway, the first phase of Yamamoto's attack ends. But was it enough? At 07:05, a Japanese pilot breaks radio silence to inform Nagumo another air attack is needed to finish off the American base. Nagumo is faced with one of the most consequential decisions of the battle. Does he launch another bombing attack on Midway? Or does he prepare for a naval battle with potential American aircraft carriers as planned? Before he can decide, bombs and torpedoes start to rain down on his fleet. American squadrons launched earlier from Midway have finally reached the Japanese carriers. Nagumo is shocked. There's no way the Americans could have reached his fleet so quickly unless they knew of his location in advance. As Nagumo tries to figure out what to do next, he is shocked again as the American submarine Nautilus emerges behind his fleet. In the midst of all this panic, Nagumo still has to make his decision. And at 07:15, he does. He will rearm his planes with bombs and prepare for a second attack on Midway. But 13 minutes after Nagumo issues his order, a Japanese scout spots 10 American ships off Midway. Nagumo is stunned. There weren't supposed to be any ships. As American pilots continue to attack his fleet, he orders his crews to stop arming bombs and prepare those aircraft still armed with torpedoes to attack the enemy ships. Across the battlefield, Admiral Spruance's carriers Enterprise and Hornet are busy launching 116 aircraft to attack the Japanese carriers, as Yorktown prepares to launch more. At 08:20, Nagumo receives confirmation of at least one American aircraft carrier in the area. He is shaken, but can't act until his bombers finish returning from Midway. Yamamoto also receives the report of the American carrier, but expecting Nagumo to attack immediately, chooses not to interfere and allows the battle to play out on its own, a decision that will prove costly. Nagumo's bombers finally return, and he orders his fleet to redirect towards the one American carrier he knows of. Not a minute later, the first squadron of Devastator dive bombers arrives from the Hornet. Unescorted by fighters, all 15 are shot down. 2 more air groups follow, one from the Hornet and the other from Yorktown. Of the 26 Devastators sent in, only 6 return. It appears the Americans are overmatched. Confident they have the upper hand, the Japanese take time to refuel and rearm their fighters. When out of nowhere, 26 American Dauntlesses roar out of the sunlight, and dive bomb the Kaga. This is Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey and his air group, the first to launch off the Enterprise that morning at 07:06. Their mission was to attack the Japanese carriers, but when McCluskey and his men arrived at the supposed location, there were no enemy ships in sight. Dangerously low on fuel and unable to contact his superiors because of radio silence, McCluskey has a decision to make. He can safely return to the Enterprise or take one last stab at the enemy carrier with what little fuel he has left. He makes a choice Admiral Nimitz later called one of the most important decisions of the battle. Acting on instinct, McCluskey turns his squadron northwest, following the path he thinks the Japanese would take towards the American fleet. His quick thinking shifts the tide at Midway, and the next 5 minutes will determine the course of the battle. McCluskey's group drops 9 bombs that hit, one striking a gasoline truck near the bridge that kills the entire command staff. The Kaga is effectively destroyed. Within minutes, fighters and bombers from the Yorktown arrive. They dive and attack the Soryu, inflicting 3 hits on the port side. They strike the munitions, setting off a chain reaction that engulfs the entire ship in flames. The next target is Admiral Nagumo's command ship, the Akagi. U.S. fighters strike the Akagi's deck, destroying planes waiting to take off. A Japanese sailor would later call the scene a burning hell. Nagumo is forced to transfer off the burning Akagi to the light cruiser Nagara and radios Yamamoto with the devastating update. Only one carrier remains, the Hiryu, and only because it was well ahead of the rest of the Japanese fleet. The battle is slipping away from Nagumo, and he knows it. He launches an air attack on the Yorktown. 18 dive bombers and 6 fighters take off from the Hiryu, but the Japanese planes are intercepted en route by American fighters. 14 Japanese planes survive the air battle, and at noon they successfully attack the Yorktown, setting the American carrier ablaze within minutes. The Yorktown is damaged, but still functional. Nevertheless, Admiral Fletcher transfers to the nearby heavy cruiser Astoria and hands over his command of the battle to Admiral Spruance, stationed aboard the Enterprise. Meanwhile, a second wave launches from Hiryu, headed to strike the Yorktown yet again. Nearly the same scenario plays out. Americans intercept the Japanese 15 minutes out and manage to take down a few planes. 5 Japanese torpedo bombers break through and land 2 blows on the Yorktown. The carrier tilts 26 degrees to its port side, the flight deck almost touching the water. At 14:55, Captain Elliot Buckmaster orders, "Abandon ship." In retaliation, Admiral Spruance orders all available dive bombers to attack the Hiryu, now only 72 miles out from the Yorktown. 40 unescorted Dauntlesses take off from Enterprise and Hornet, the fighters left behind to defend the carriers. The American bomber group dives on the Hiryu. It takes several critical hits and is left disabled. It is the final surprise for the Japanese and the fatal blow. Major combat is over. Although small clashes will continue over the next 2 days, the Americans have decidedly won the Battle of Midway. Both sides sustained major losses, but the Japanese even more so. By the best estimates, the Japanese lost 2,500 servicemen, 292 aircraft, and 1 heavy cruiser, along with their 4 aircraft carriers. The Americans ultimately sacrificed the Yorktown, 1 destroyer, 145 aircraft, and 307 servicemen. What was the impact of the Battle of Midway? The Japanese abandoned their plan to expand into the Pacific and would remain on the defense for the rest of World War II. The American victory exemplified the indispensable power of code-breaking and tactical foresight. The tide of the war shifted. The Japanese military had lost a great deal of morale. The U.S. military and the American public were energized for the first time since Pearl Harbor. The Japanese could be defeated, and the Americans would be the ones to do it.